28% knew that the court is supposed to be impartial. So there appears to be a vast misunderstanding about Supreme Court proceedings and the federal court in general. And according to C-SPAN, there's an easy solution. Give America a look inside by the Supreme Court by allowing cameras to televise oral arguments. Is that a good idea? Let's talk about it with Kenneth Vecchio, attorney, former prosecutor and former judge, and KrisAnne Hall, a constitutional attorney and former prosecutor. And KrisAnne, I want to start with you because there was a time when White House briefings were also off camera. You got a lot of useful information. People acted with a certain decorum. Now they've turned into something of a joke. Wouldn't the same thing happen eventually with the Supreme Court if the justices were on camera and the lawyers were on camera as well?
I don't think so. I think that it would be a more active check and balance on the judiciary. I think that what you would find is that the people would not only know the justices by name, but they would know them by how they conduct themselves. And it would be what is intended to be the greatest check and balance on the judiciary, the people paying attention. And if the judges know that the people are watching, maybe they'll be more bound to principle and law rather than to activism.
Kenneth, how about it? The idea that you open up the court to people being able to watch from home, they're more engaged, they know more about the Supreme Court.
Well, I would tend to agree with KrisAnne, but I'm worried about this really far out group of people that's growing and growing that don't seem to understand or care about the Equal Protection Clause, and that's supposed to protect everybody equally. And I'm not saying that KrisAnne thinks this, but I'll find out in a moment. There should not be any exceptions to this. For people who are protected by so-called rape shield laws, for example, that are alleged victims of sexual abuse, they should not have any protections to be avoiding cameras. The people who are the defendants should be treated equally. And that means that either cameras should not be in the courtroom altogether or should be in the courtroom. And I tend to think keep the cameras out for the protection of the defendants. They shouldn't even be named. There's something called innocent until proven guilty and proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
And KrisAnne, how about to that point? I mean, if there are certain people who are protected from the cameras now, shouldn't that also extend to federal judges?
Well, I think that the cameras in the courtroom are a protection for the defendant. I think that it is consistent with the Sixth Amendment that all people accused of a crime should have a speedy and public trial. And the reason for that is so that the defendant is protected. And then you don't get justices like we have now in the federal courtrooms, the activist judges who claim that the Constitution's not even allowed in their courtrooms. And I believe that the exception, that there could be one exception or exceptions in this particular stance for crimes or situations that involve children. But I believe that, as Thomas Jefferson said, that if the people once become inattentive to public affairs, he said, you and I, governors and justices, will all become wolves, as that's the general nature of who we are, in spite of specific exceptions.
But give me an example of why crimes involving children should be accepted. What do you mean? The defendant should be outed in those cases, but the accusers should not be named? I mean, where is the fundamental equality in that?
Well, I think it's because in our society we protect minors. You notice that when there are things happening on camera in the news or whatever, we black out minors because of the effect of publicity can have on minors. They don't. Well,
I agree with that. I agree with that. I agree with that in certain types of circumstances. But I'm just talking about the fundamental principle of that people should be treated innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And how do you factor in that the minors who might be accusing them or who are the alleged victims, that they should be shielded, but those who are accused, their names are thrown all over the media? Like, let's take our friend Asia Argento, the actress who's one of the Me Too movement leaders. All of a sudden, some boy toy kid comes out and says at 17 years old, she had sex with me. I bet she's praying right now. There's a Ken Vecchio out there who's saying, my name should be protected too. She didn't seem to think that way before. How do you factor that in?
I I dismiss the idea that having cameras in the courtroom is a denial of innocent until proven guilty. I believe that what happens because we don't have cameras in the courtroom, we have these cases being tried in the court of public opinion where we already automatically choose sides. But by having cameras in the courtroom, we not only get acquainted with justices, but we get acquainted with the fundamental process of due process.
But
and I think
don't
that
we
is
have a
something that
problem
is
with
severely lacking in America.
I get your point, but don't we have a potential problem of the judges, the justices, and the lawyers caring more about the court of public opinion once they're on TV than what the American public is concerned about? In other words, their incentive becomes, hey, I want to look good for the public regardless of what happens in this case.
You know, I think that's already a problem, but that's an issue that needs to be dealt with ethics. We have a serious problem in the courtroom right now with activist judges, and I believe that those activist judges are who they are because they are held unaccountable. If they're on the camera and they are to be held accountable for what they say in the courtroom, then maybe what we'll find is a stricter, a more fundamentally principled system of ethics for our judges and lawyers than hiding behind the secrecy of what they do in their courtrooms where they're not even allowed to be recorded.
We got to end it there, but I'll maintain that I would love to have my case heard in front of Ken Vecchio or Chrisanne Hall if either of you were on camera or not. Thank you as always. We appreciate it. Still to come, a body camera captured the moment a police officer chose to run into a burning house to save a family. Plus, things got saucy during Spain's most famous food fight. Cirque du So Strange is ahead.
Get i24 News